Level 1. Background programs. Cost 3 to 8 frames per second. This is the FPS killer everyone starts with because it looks the most harmless and becomes the most embarrassing when you finally find it. And I say this with genuine sympathy, because we've all been there, or we know someone who has been there. The important thing is we don't stay there. Let's talk about the person who lives at this level for years and doesn't even suspect it. This is the person with 40 Chrome tabs open, because closing them means admitting that some tab is no longer needed, and that's too heavy an existential decision for a Tuesday. This is the person whose Discord, Spotify, Steam, Epic Games, 2 antivirus programs simultaneously, and RGB lighting control software all launch at system startup because somewhere along the line an installer asked launch at Windows startup, and the yes answer was selected on autopilot. Discord in the background eats 200 to 400 megabytes of RAM and a pinch of CPU power just to exist. Chrome with 40 tabs eats gigabytes, and every tab with an autoplay video silently munches on GPU in the background while you play Valorant and can't figure out why your mouse feels like it's swimming through jelly. Real-time antivirus scanning checks every file the game tries to read from disk, adding milliseconds of latency that are imperceptible individually and turn into stutters when 15 of them happen at once. The overlay from RGB software by Corsair, Razer, or Asus spins up an extra process that syncs with the game and steals frames that no one owes. Add launchers to the mix: Steam, Epic, Battle.net, GOG Galaxy, all simultaneously in the system tray. Because deleting even one means admitting that you might never return to that game you bought 3 years ago and never open. Open Task Manager right now. Not in 5 minutes. Right now. Sort by GPU and by memory. What you'll see will be an uncomfortable truth. Closing unnecessary background processes is the only free upgrade on this list. It literally costs 0 and gives you plus 5 to 8 frames per second without a single new component. What this cures sudden micro stutters mid-match. Unexplained FPS drops for no visible reason. The feeling that the game is lagging despite your hardware technically being smooth enough. What this doesn't cure if your graphics card is objectively too weak for the game. Closing Chrome won't turn a GTX 1050 into an RTX 4070. You're still eating instant noodles, but at least you're not sharing them with 20 background processes that eat your FPS silently and without asking. Level 3. Overheating and throttling. Cost 15 to 30 frames per second, and here the killer stops being amusing. This is the golden mean of the list, the point where the problem becomes physical, tangible, and can no longer be blamed on software. Who lives at this level? The person who built or bought their system 2 or 3 years ago, never opened the side panel, and treats dust as part of the interior design. This is the one whose CPU reaches 95 degrees within the first 5 minutes of a match, after which the motherboard panics and forcibly downclocks frequencies to save the chip from death. Thermal paste applied at the factory 3 years ago dries out over time and loses thermal conductivity. This isn't a myth, it's chemistry, and it happens to everyone without exception. Dust in the CPU cooler radiator blocks airflow to the point where the temperature difference between a clean radiator and a clogged one reaches 15 to 20 degrees under identical load. A graphics card caked with dust around the fans begins to throttle the GPU core upon reaching the temperature limit, typically around 83 degrees, and the frequency drops not smoothly but in jumps that you feel as sudden FPS drops mid-combat. Poor case ventilation, one intake fan, and no exhaust creates a thermal pocket inside the case where hot air simply has nowhere to go and heats everything repeatedly. Thermal throttling isn't a bug. It's a protective mechanism that the hardware enables itself to avoid burning out, and it works against you precisely at the moment when you need stable frames. Open the side panel and look at how much dust is actually there. If you haven't done this in over a year, the answer won't please you. Cleaning the case with compressed air and replacing thermal paste is literally a free or nearly free upgrade that restores 15 to 30 frames without a single new part, simply because the hardware no longer has to defend itself from its own owner. This cures stutters that happen specifically during long gaming sessions, where the first 10 minutes are perfect and then a slow decline begins. This doesn't cure an inherently weak cooler that physically can't handle a powerful processor. Sometimes the issue isn't dust, but that the stock cooler simply wasn't designed for overclocking. Level 2. Drivers and Windows updates. Cost 5 to 15 frames per second, and this is the level where the killer's personality starts to emerge. Level 1 was an accident. Level 2 is already a systemic problem, where there's no one to blame but the operating system itself and your own laziness in updating it. The person stuck at Level 2 is usually perfectly reasonable. They have good hardware, an RTX, somewhere in the range of a 3070 or 4060, a processor no older than 3 years, and yet their FPS in new games seems artificially low. This is the person who installed their graphics driver a year ago and decided, if it works, don't touch it. This is the one whose Windows update quietly stalled halfway through CPU downloading a cumulative update package, and now that package loads the disk and CPU every time the game launches because the system is desperately trying to complete the update at any cost. An outdated NVIDIA or AMD driver isn't some abstract problem. It's specific optimizations for specific games that simply aren't loaded into your system. A new game releases, the studio puts out a game-ready driver that adds 10 to 20% performance specifically for that title, and you're playing on a driver from 6 months ago, missing out on performance you paid real money for. Windows Power Mode set to balanced instead of high performance quietly limits CPU boost exactly at peak load moments, where FPS is decided in milliseconds. Cumulative Windows updates sometimes change the thread scheduler in ways that make the game run on the wrong CPU cores, and this is visible to the naked eye as rhythmic stutters every few seconds. Go to Power Settings and set High Performance. Go to the NVIDIA or AMD website. Update your driver manually, not through Windows Automatic Search that gives you a version 6 months out of date. This cures unstable frame times, stuttering every few seconds, the feeling that the game isn't as smooth as a streamer's with similar hardware. This doesn't cure fundamental VRAM shortages or CPU bottlenecks. A driver accelerates what's already there. It doesn't create power out of thin air.